Welcome to the Crested Butte's Home Podcast with me, Frank Cancella. This is the first episode I have recorded remotely. The sound quality isn't quite as good as some of my other episodes, but honestly, it's not bad at all, and who cares when it's such a good conversation. With my guest this week, who grew up in the Caribbean, which is not very common, obviously, for here in Crested Butte, but he came to Crested Butte, and it kind of helped him find himself, and that was a really interesting story, and I'm sure many of you know him from Townie Books and Rumors Coffee, which he owns with his wife. And as you might guess, he is a real book lover as well as a writer. So we talk about a lot of books and writing and craft and art. And let's go ahead and get on to the interview with Arvin Ramgoolam. On the Crested Butte's Home podcast today, my guest is Arvin Ramgoolam. So tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from to start off with.
Right on. Thanks for having me. This is super fun and the first podcast I've ever been on. And I'm just really honored. Thank you so much, Frank. You're really honoring me today. I'm feeling really good. I originally born in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. Some people might know that, and some people might have to go look at a map real quick. But I grew up in Miami Beach and moved around the country a little bit and then crash landed in Crested Butte around about 2004.
When did you move from Trinidad and Tobago to Miami?
I was 8 years old. I was a kid. I was really
8.
young.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what was the story with that move?
There's my family were already somewhat here. We had a lot of extended family here in the States who lived in Miami Beach, and we're sort of joining them. I also had a medical condition too that I needed treatment, and there wasn't any treatment anywhere else for it. So I had to sort of come to the States to get treatment for that.
So you moved to Miami at 8. So what was it like growing up there? What did you do as a kid growing up?
It was pretty normal-ish, I would say. As far as like living in the city, a lot of people who grow up in cities and grow up in apartment buildings and things like that. And of course, it was South Beach in the 80s. And I mean, going to school, the neighborhood where my elementary school is essentially the backdrop for Miami Vice. So we'd get to school sometimes, and right out front, the white Lamborghini for Miami Vice would be parked right there. It was pretty wild sometimes. And not really knowing much as a kid about, the drug world that Miami was back then, and only learning later on. I mean, there was a lot of crazy things happening around us, but we weren't super aware of it as kids.
Yeah, that's crazy. The Lamborghini was right there. And
like they would shoot out front in front of our apartment building, and we would see. I never saw Don Johnson, but I did see Tubbs several times over the course of years.
Really? Awesome.
Yeah, which was always kind of cool. Anyways,
awesome. And what activities were you into? I mean, did you? Obviously you weren't probably into skiing like some of my guests have been into, but
no.
What were you into?
No, I think I was probably a pretty typical Gen X immigrant kid in the city, very attached to schoolwork, tons of reading, a lot of library time, not too much outdoor activities, not even really going to the beach wasn't a huge part of my growing up until I was in maybe college.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, we never really skipped school and went to the beach or anything like that. We sort of just skipped school and went to other people's houses. And it's really strange to even think that, lots of video games, late night TV, which I think is essentially a lot of Gen X people that's growing up, who didn't have someone to introduce them to the outdoors like so many people here have.
Well, even in Denver, I'm always just blown away at how many kids growing up in Denver have never been to the mountains, to ski or hike or anything. It's crazy to think about.
I
It
meet,
sounds like you had
I meet
almost
people to this day. Yeah, I meet people who, I'm fairly talkative, and whenever I interact with people, they ask me if you need 4-wheel drive to get to Crested Butte. Is it 7 hours away from Denver? Is it? And I'm sort of just befuddled, wondering if they've ever even looked at a map of their own state.
right.
I think it's pretty wild.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about then how you got to Crested Butte. So what's that story?
My best friend married Natalie Pfister. We were my best friend and I. We worked at a bookstore in South Florida called Books and Books in the cafe, and that was over 20 years ago now. And this young girl started working there too, and she that was Scott Pfister's daughter. She was born and raised here, and like had all these sort of funny stories that we made fun of her for, that we sort of, I think city folk think about small towns not knowing how incredible and beautiful and amazing this community was. But she, after she married my best friend, they came back to the East Coast and grabbed me and dragged me out here. I didn't really even want to come out here. I think I was a pretty typical, Miami person who was sort of looking at maybe moving to Boston or New York, places like that. I'd already lived in Boston and in New York for a minute, Chicago, and didn't really see myself going anywhere further west than Chicago, and couldn't really imagine the landscape at all. But they put me in the car and they dragged me out here somewhat against my will, because they thought I really needed to get out here.
Well, all right, so you get here. What was your thoughts at first? I mean, it's colder, it's not humid, it's not flat. So
yeah, I got here, gosh, what was it? Labor Day weekend, and it was nighttime, and the first place I went to was the Last Steep and got a burger, and I've been getting burgers at the Last Steep ever since. Never let me down. It's sort of a bummer right now with everything that's going on that they're not quite open right now, because I'm really jonesing for one. But the next day we woke up and we drove up to Irwin, and I was pretty blown away. I'd never really been anywhere like this and experienced anything like this, and had there's no point of reference. My family, who have never really visited me beyond just my wedding, they'd never had a point of reference either. So for years, I would tell them about the place, and it was really hard for them to kind of imagine it, as well as friends that I never really, I sort of stopped connecting with, because I think once I became more attuned to living here, we sort of lost touch and lost connection, being able to talk about where I was. It was that was a tough transition, but being here was just amazing. And I think it really was a place I was looking for and not really expecting to find. I think my personality, my nature, it has always been really built for a place like Crested Butte, openly welcoming, and I don't think those particular traits, work well in big cities. I think they do better in places like this, really, and I hadn't really realized that until I got here.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation for sure. Yeah, I guess it's something you needed that you didn't know you needed, or whatever however you want to phrase it.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So you got here, and then what did you get into? Work, play, all that kind of thing as you stuck your toes in the water of Crested Butte.
It was great. It was great because I sort of started living a little bit outside of a lot of walls that I sort of built around myself. Before I got here, I was essentially a med school dropout. I did not finish my medical science training and schooling, and sort of I was putting my family off, saying that I was just sort of looking for something else and not really committing to anything. And I got here and just put the brakes on all of that. I mean, my life just completely changed, really, and sort of started kind of like thinking about things so much differently. And really just working and reading. I literally spent 2 years working and going to the Crested Butte Library, reading 3 books a week, and being a shut-in, except for going snowshoeing. I wasn't really into any of the sports that I came to love later on. For those first 2 years, I was just really enjoying the life and the lifestyle of just living in town and kind of being closed in for myself and being away from everything that was familiar in my life.
That's interesting. So you were here, but you were mostly, or a lot of the time at least, just staying in and reading and just kind of learning about maybe yourself and the world, it sounds like almost.
Yeah, kind of relaunching, kind of things that maybe I hadn't thought about, and thinking about writing more and thinking about art more again, kind of unplugging from the super intense school life that I'd sort of built up in those years before getting here.
In this episode's Crested Butte Real Estate Minute, I am recording this in April of 2020 during the coronavirus and COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. So obviously I'm getting a lot of questions about what all this might mean for the Crested Butte real estate market, and honest answers that we just don't know yet. We just don't have a lot of data, and it just hasn't been that long to know what this might do to Crested Butte and Gunnison real estate values. So for now, properties are still being listed, they're still going under contract, and they're still being sold. It's just not a normal situation. The best thing maybe to do is go ahead and sign up for my newsletters. You can find those at Crested Butte Real Estate Agent /newsletters, and that way I can keep you updated every month with my newsletter on how the Crested Butte real estate market is doing. You can also call me, Frank Kinsella, or text me at 970-596-7990. I'm happy to answer any specific questions about the Crested Butte real estate market as well. Let's get back to the interview. You've talked about reading a few different times, so I guess let's go ahead and just get into it. So you and your wife are owners of Townie and Rumors Coffee. So how did that start? Let's just jump ahead and go into that.
Yeah, story. We were really fortunate, in a very strange time. It was 2009, and I was sort of getting a little bit restless as far as looking to get out of Crested Butte. I'd gone through, like a couple different little mini phases in my Crested Butte life, and had a blast, between that getting here and to the point that we started the business of, like being a KBUT DJ and volunteering a ton and having the pleasure of being King of Seoul. And so by 2009, I was sort of looking back outwards and thinking maybe it's time to get on to the next thing. And the economy tanked and things weren't super awesome. And so Danica and I had been talking with our friend David, who owned Blue Moon Books at the time, about trying to add coffee to his business. And the space that we're in now was just freshly built. And so we kind of started poking around a little bit and found out that several people were interested in being in the space that we're in right now. So we went ahead and added our names to the queue. And there were maybe 5 or 6 people who were interested in the space who all dropped out. And then it sort of came up, and we had to make kind of a quick decision if we wanted to get into this space, have David move Blue Moon Books into one side of the business, and we would start up the coffee half on the other side of it. If anyone's familiar with the space, they know it's somewhat split in a way. There's 2 doors and there's 2 entrances. Well, at one point, this was sort of imagined as 2 completely separate spaces. And so we were able to get in here before the construction was even done and have them leave a pass-through between the 2 spaces. So what you see now is basically you're able to go from Rumors to Townie, or Townie to Rumors, just be able to go from the coffee side to the book side. Okay, so that's, I'm kind of remembering all this now. So as it started, you didn't have a business partner on the book side of things. He was doing his thing, and you guys are doing your thing on the coffee side. That's how that started. Yeah, exactly. We took a really big chance. We scraped together a little bit of money, and we stretched it really, really far. We opened on day one with $0 in the bank. We were really floored by the line that formed outside and the party, and we had just a really great time with music and people. And so I look back at some of those photos now, and it's really crazy at how much food that we thought we needed. And I sort of look at the food now, just knowing, like, thinking about food costs and things like that, that we've sort of integrated in how we think about things. But we weren't really thinking about things like that back then. And we'd grown as, cafe business owners, like thinking about a lot of food costs and things like that. But back then, boy, we were really just kind of learning so much every single day. We both had cafe work experience. We both worked in cafes. And so this was our little shot at trying to start something ourselves. And we weren't even married at the time. We sort of made this pre-commitment before we even committed to each other, really. So it's pretty crazy to think about some of the things that we were into back then.
For sure. That's a big leap of faith in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, totally.
What, why coffee? Why did you think there was a need for what you did?
Well, there was already great coffee in town, Camp 4, at the time, Buckaroo, there wasn't a shortage of good coffee in Crested Butte. But what we were really looking to do was create the coffee house, as in a place for people to go to connect to, we'd sort of imagined music and poetry and things have sort of changed a little bit since then, but we've accomplished what we set out to do, was create a place where people can connect to each other in an informal way in our town that was a little bit more grab and go, the coffee experience. So we were looking to kind of have that coffee house experience that we'd sort of loved, the one that I'd grown up working in and visiting all over the country in different places. I sort of missed that myself and thought that there was a niche for that here.
Let's also move into how did Townie Books start then, from Blue Moon?
2 years after we jumped in to the space, things were going on with David, and he wasn't able to keep going with Blue Moon the way that it had already been, and it was time to up our lease. And so we decided to take over the other side of our space. And the difference being that our bookstore versus the previous one, Blue Moon versus Townie, was that we were all new books. And that's what we were going to focus on. And sort of mesh the two things, the coffee and the books, which was sort of an incomplete picture, up until then, where, having two separate people running two separate businesses, but somewhat in the same space, was a little bit disjointed. And us being here from both sides, sort of was, you can imagine, it just became a more clearer picture, having the books and the coffee and doing sort of the things that we'd been wanting to do, which was have more events and more book things and more authors and more business that would drive one side and the other.
Yep, that makes sense. So, I mean, you've already talked about your love of reading. Why books? Why reading? What makes books so special to you?
The escapism, the art. It's always been, for me, it's always been somewhere where I could go and experience a different life or a different world. There's some saying out there that without a book you live one life, but with books you live thousands of lives. And I feel like that's true. I feel like my life is just continuous curiosity, not just about things but people. And books sort of allow me to explore that curiosity continuously, all the time, really. To get into people's minds, different characters' minds and mindsets, and see different outcomes and experience different things. Yeah, books have just been part of who I am for so long. It's really hard to imagine my life without them.
That's interesting. Do you feel that way about other mediums? Like, my first thought is movies. Like, you're a big movie buff as well for the escapism part of it, or not?
I used to be. I'm not as big a movie person. I feel like I sort of burned out on movies. But the one thing that I've sort of continued to love and find some strange solace in is comic books. I've always been a comic book person on top of everything, starting out probably around the same time as a lot of people my age, back in the early 90s with sort of that explosion, death of Superman era of comic books, but really continuing for most of my life. And it's one thing that I've continued to just really get something out of, as well as just my regular reading. Just the art and the history of comics are just so fascinating.
Do you have a huge collection then at home, or?
Not anymore. Having moved around the country a little bit and gotten to the point where I had that thing where my family very generously, they really didn't have to do this. They hung on to a good chunk of my collection that I'd sort of whittled away over the course of many years of visiting home and getting rid of things, down to sort of a core collection of Superman books and X-Men books and some independent comic books and some collectible things. And so it's not as big as it maybe once was, but it's definitely it's maybe still too big to try to hang on to.
Fair enough. Well, what are some of your favorite books then, all time?
All time. There's some great ones out there. There's one that I just continuously pick up, and it's kind of an oddball book in a way that every time I talk about it or show it to someone, there's always either it's one way or the other. Either they're very interested and they want to read this book, or they're sort of turned off by it because it just sounds so strange. And it's called The Unchangeable Spots of Leopards by Christopher Jansma. And the book has sections that continuously go on where it does something metafictionally, where you're reading a story about a writer writing a story, and then at some point you slip into the story that he's writing, and it goes on from there, and you sort of lose your way, but you're essentially still reading about the same characters through the book. Now, if that sounds really strange to you, you think to yourself, I am never going to read a book like that, then you know which category you fall into.
Uh-huh.
And the thing about this book is it's just great, and it's really brilliant because many writers have tried to do something like this. This is a trick that a lot of fiction writers have tried to pull off in different ways, but Christopher Jansma has done this the best. He's the only person I've ever seen pull this trick off 100%, and it's really brilliant. That's one of my favorites. I'm a big fan of Junot Diaz. Books like Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde was the 2007 Pulitzer Prize winner, which is a great book, which also has another metafictional element in it, which is the book is narrated by someone who is smarter than the author, smarter than the writer himself. He's sort of written this character to narrate a story that even he feels like is beyond him. And the narrator does things like include footnotes in this story that he's telling. And the footnotes really act in a couple different ways. It gives you information, but it's also meant as a distraction from the story, because every time the narrator gets close to revealing something about himself that you might not like, he throws in these little footnotes, and then you get sort of sidetracked by those footnotes. And so I just love little things like that. And short stories, I'm a big short story fan. All-time favorite books by John Cheever, and more newer things and by Colorado writers like Kent Harroff, who after moving here discovered that he lived in Salida, which was pretty epic. There's a great book of short stories right now called Sabrina and Karina by Kali Fajardo and Stein, and it's set in southern Colorado in Denver, and it's the book of short stories I've been waiting for since I've been reading short stories. I mean, it's just really brilliant and smart. Yeah, so that's just a small smattering of things that I love. There's even some oddball things in there that, there's just all-time favorite nonfiction reads.
I was just going to say, do you like the nonfiction as well, or it sounds like you're more of a fiction fan?
Mainly fiction. Fiction is where I spend most of my time. But there's things like Mark Karlasky's Salt, which is a history of salt.
It's amazing sometimes when an uninteresting subject of nonfiction can be really, really interesting because they tie it to, I don't know, world events or something like that. Which
Exactly. Yeah, that's Mark Kolaski, and his book. He has Salt. He has another book called Paper. He has another one called Cod. There's little things like, yeah, I'm just what you said. Like little things that you wouldn't really think about that have bigger implications for the world.
yeah. Like, have you read Six Glasses That Changed the World? Something like that. I might not have the title
Yeah,
right.
yeah. They call that an evergreen in the book business. It's a book that's just always on nonfiction shelves everywhere, on in every bookstore that you visit.
I mean, it's a great book. It's kind of like what we were saying. I mean, it just talks about beer and wine and why they became what they are and how they changed the world, because they do. I mean, you think about medieval times, and if you wanted to die, you drink water, and if you want to live, you drink beer because it kills all the bad things. But,
yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
I love stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about too. You mentioned it really, really briefly, but writing. And you recently were awarded a fellowship. So tell us about that and what it is that you like to write.
I write myself, mainly short stories. I've had a novel that I've sort of been, imagining in parts and pieces in my brain for the better part of 10 years. But I mainly write short fiction, and the journal, the magazine that awarded the fellowship, One Story, they mainly deal in short fiction. They publish essentially one story every month. You have a really beautiful little edition that shows up in your mailbox, and it's one singular short story. And they really focus in on that. And developing that and that talent is something that's is important to them. And so my background and the story that I submitted in applying for the fellowship were obviously attractive to them, and they chose me in what I imagine is a field of really amazing people. One Story has been around now about 10 years, and they are in Brooklyn, in New York, and they are the very cutting edge of short fiction and talent. There's so much craft that goes into creating short stories, and really those are the seeds of novels and just some of the amazing books that we have, that we see all the time. And so One Story is interested in developing that talent, and I was very honored to be selected as their 2020 Adina Talv Goodman Fellow. The fellowship is named after someone who once worked with One Story, who sadly passed away far too early, and the fellowship was established as a memorial for her. If anyone is interested, I would really encourage them to go online and look up the One Story Fellowship and find her short story. It's just really brilliant and beautiful and short. And so I'm just really honored to be a part of that. And part of the fellowship is a year of online classes, and it's also includes a conference in the summer that One Story puts on for writers. So admittance to that, and a small stipend to be able to travel to New York and stay there for over a week to be able to attend this 1 week conference that has agents and editors and publishers, and also a year of mentorship, of being able to basically ask anything One Story. I'll just jump over to one quick thing and hand it back to you. That is, I don't come from what you would call a typical writing background, which is having an MFA or going to school for writing, because I'd left school so long ago now and never really went back to it, but always pursued the art. That's also something I think is part of being part of this fellowship, is being someone who celebrates this art and makes it a part of their daily lives, regardless of whether or not I've gone to school for it or I've been published before.
I feel like a lot of people have this dream to write the great American novel or whatever, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's in a lot of people to write and get their dream out there.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to be always sort of involved in writing here in Crested Butte, especially. At one point, there was a really great conference. I think it was just simply called the Crested Butte Writers Conference. It's been a minute since I've thought about it, but they had a novel excerpt competition, and I was fortunate to come in first place for that. And I think that was even eating with people who were submitting from all over the place. The submissions are blind, so they didn't even know that I was a Crested Butte person until the very end of the judging. Yeah, it was really cool, and it was really great because that was sort of a moment where I got to connect with a really amazing writing community that's here in Crested Butte. There's so many really wonderful, supportive, working writers, really, in this town. And so being able to sort of come out and connect with that community back then, that was 2007, was great, really great and really sustaining. I think for a lot of people, they sort of, they at some point you sort of think, when you write and you send your stuff out in the world, there is just a superhuman level of rejection that you have to endure. And sort of, dealing with that continuously, you have to ask yourself, is it even worth it anymore to even do this thing? Why even bother doing this if the level of success is so small? And so when I won that Crested Butte Writers competition back then, that kept me going. Meeting Bob Puglisi, if you ever had the pleasure of meeting Bob, and connecting with the Crested Butte writers who had been meeting for over 10 years. I'm trying to think of the list of names. Sandy Fail, Courtner, I think, was in there as well. Mike Keith, Marcy Tellender. So many really wonderful people that I know to this day that have always been a part of my life, really, that I got to sort of connect with and be a part of that community, too, in this very special place.
Have you considered, teaching creative writing, or even just completing that novel that's kind of in your head, like just letting Danica take the reins of the shop and everything, and just sitting down full time to be a writer, just out of curiosity?
Well, yeah, so the last part of this fellowship too is being able to connect with the editor of one story. Her name is Hannah Tonti, and she has several books out in the world and is a very well-regarded person in the world of writing. And it's a real honor to be able to work with her. And sort of at the end of this year, I would submit to her either my collection of stories or whatever I have of a novel, and have about an hour or so of her time to get just open, honest feedback on what it is I've got, how I can make it better, what I need to work on, how do I take the tools that I've gotten from the one story online classes that have been going on throughout the year that I've been a part of, and then take that to the next level and do that. And so that's what I've been trying to do in this year, is really make writing more a part of my day, getting up a little bit earlier before the kids wake up, which is they wake up pretty early. And really, getting a lot of work done, really working on those ideas that I've had for so long that I've just never really given myself the time or the space. And really, and also Danica has definitely, done her best to, and she always has. It's such a wonderful thing to have such a supportive partner that supports you in your art and that's not dismissive, and that, we all have that great partner, or I would hope everyone has a great partner like this in their life, that we've been able to have this business together. Not every couple, I think, can have a business or do something like this that would put them in, in this situation together. Not a lot of couples work together, I think. And so for her, she's one of the biggest parts of my writing life, really, is encouraging me and always being a cheerleader for always putting myself out there and trying to do this crazy, crazy thing, when really I think, the practical side would say that we've got a family, we've got a business, we've got things to do. There's only so many hours in the day. Why would you spend any of it throwing it away on art that you don't know what will ever come of it?
That's super cool. What is that? This is a question I was not planning to ask, but what does working on it look like? Is that like almost outlines and you're just trying to connect a bunch of dots, or is that sitting down and just writing?
I've got a couple different ways of getting work done. One is, starting with kind of like a line or an idea or a thing that I've been just thinking and thinking and thinking about, and just getting that down on paper. And whatever that thing is, it may not even materialize into a story. It might get co-opted into another story or another thing. And so up until recently, I've always been a little bit scattershot in my creative process. But now, after being part of these writing classes and things like that, and really focusing my time, I've come up with some sort of generative exercises for myself of creating a place and a character and a setting and a tone, and then writing my way out of that, or just getting 100 words down on the paper. But luckily, I've got sort of like a little list of stories that I've been meaning to work on. So I've been sort of working my way through those. But just a little bit every day has really made a huge difference. I mean, for anybody out there who's a writer or thinking about writing, so many novels, so many short stories have just really been born from 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day of writing, stealing away that little bit of time. It can really add up.
Awesome. That's what I was wondering. That sounds like the way to do it. Well, I wanted to circle back around. I wasn't really sure how to do this, but we're, you and I are recording right now over Zoom, and it's mid-April of 2020 for someone listening to this much later. And, we're all staying at home and dealing with coronavirus and everything else. So what is it like as far as the business right now, and what can people do if they wanted to help the businesses if they're listening to this like right now?
Oh gosh, yeah. This is great. Thanks for bringing it up, Frank. It's a very strange time for all the businesses in Crested Butte to be here and be sort of locked in the store. Really, I've been here almost every single day except for 2 days a week, and it's been really great because people are just calling and emailing and texting for books and puzzles. People really love puzzles right now.
That's awesome.
I had never really expected my livelihood to hinge on whether or not I had Gustav Klimt puzzles or ski puzzles, or it's really funny. And so we've been really touched by people reaching out and buying gift certificates. Is one way that people have been really helping with our business and other businesses here in town. Making a purchase, buying books for your family and for yourself. That's another way. And we've got a GoFundMe campaign going right now. Unfortunately, we were really uncertain about when stimulus, disaster relief money would be available. And as of this date that we're recording, we still haven't really heard anything or know anything about when we're supposed to get that. But as a resort business, we missed our big spring break. And that's when we sort of pay down all of the bills that we've accumulated since January, having the business going and building up stock and having our store ready for that time of year. And missing that is just a huge chasm for us. And so our vendors mainly, some of them are working with us and some of them are not, unfortunately. And so the GoFundMe is to help us bridge that gap and get over to where we would normally be at this point of year, where we can just about limp into the summertime. And so if anyone goes on and goes on to our Facebook page or looks us up on GoFundMe, they'll be able to find our campaign going right now.
And I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes for this episode too. So yeah, the business cycle in Crested Butte it's so odd for anyone, in a non-resort community, the way that, you basically got to, squirrel away your money in March to get back to the summer and then go.
Yeah. It's a very strange creature. Yeah. The winter business and and then spring and then into summertime can be very long sometimes. And there's there's already a lot of uncertainty there. And not knowing what was going on with the economy this year and things like that, I think we were somewhat prepared to weather, we're always somewhat prepared to weather a rocky situation as far as the business goes, because this is a bookstore and we don't do this to make a ton of money. we do this because we love our town. We love what we do. We're really passionate about people connecting through books and through community. And so, we work on a razor's edge, and we can sort of work around a lot of things. But what's happening in the world right now is just such a gut punch for businesses and towns like this.
Well, yeah, and it's I'm glad that the community is coming out and supporting. And I guess a personal story for me, I'll just throw it out there because stores like yours are just, they're important, and I think every town needs a Townie Books / Rumors Coffee House. I lived in Roslyn, British Columbia one year, and I was just being a ski bum up there, and it was like a really bad winter. So I showed up in like late November thinking they were going to open, and it was such a bad year, and that particular ski area doesn't make snow, so they didn't open. And I moved up there, and I didn't know anybody. So like that was the highlight of my day, was to go to, they have a really, really nice bookstore, really similar to yours. I'd go like order a cup of coffee and just like sit there and actually see people and not be like social distancing when I didn't have to social distance. But and I'd play some drop-in hockey and get schooled by all the Canadians. But those are like the two things I could do for like a month straight. So yeah, I mean, it is definitely a meeting place and a community place. In a Crested Butte is all about community. It's like one of the things that's really big here. We're about community and recreation. That's what I've learned from this podcast. That's what Crested Butte is. Yeah. So
we're really fortunate. I mean, it's really great. Every day that I'm in here, that there's people, and even now really that we're sort of, our business is sort of running in a very different way right now, but getting to know people in more than just a transactional way. You come in, you give money, you get a thing, and you walk out the door. It's so much more than that, really. I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm sort of repeating myself here about this, but I love talking to visitors, and I love people who I've known for 10 plus years coming in and just having I have a career, I have a job where I'm able to see my friends almost every single day and make new ones every single day. And it's just a really tremendous thing. And then connect people and then make things happen and introduce people to one another, where one person may not know that another person is doing something that they can maybe collaborate and do something else. Or we've been really honored to have people have their wedding proposals and things like that happen here in the store, have planned proposals where they're a couple, the guy brings his, in a moment, fiance in, and they think they're on vacation, just the two of them, but then their family members start showing up in the store, and then they're just taking up a bunch of space, and the fiance, she can't believe that everyone's here at the same time, and out of that comes the proposal. And things like that, they don't happen anywhere else. I mean, it's a very strange thing to have a business, but then a business that does things like that is really something more. And I'm just glad that I get to be a part of it. And I hope, at the end of everything we're going through now, that we can keep doing that and having things like that happen.
I'm sure you will. That's awesome. And I'm sure some couples have probably met there for the first time too. By the same token.
Coffee dates are the best dates.
And connecting. I mean, you're talking about connecting. I mean, you didn't mention it, but I'm sure you've connected people to their favorite book. I'm sure some people have come back and said, that was the best book ever. Thanks for recommending.
I had a phone call the other day from someone who's looking for a selection of books because they had not read in over 10, 15 years. And they came in to this store during their family vacation the previous summer, and they asked us for a couple recommendations, and they spent that entire summer reading all the books we recommended to them. And so They called up again just this week and asked me to suggest some more books and have me ship them.
That's super cool.
It was really great. Yeah. And so that person was connecting with us. Even maybe we didn't even really realize how much we were connecting with them, which is really great.
Well, let's start to wrap it up a little bit. Crested Butte is home for you. Why do you choose to make Crested Butte your home?
Because they won't have me anywhere else. They won't take me anywhere else now. My life here has just unfolded and changed so much, and I've gotten to live so many different lives in just one little town, and continuously find new things, in this place, and I just love it. And now I have kids. I'm part of a whole kid world, and I get to see this place from a whole different angle. Having my twin 4-year-old girls, I mean, when the student is ready, the master will appear. I'm the student. I'm just floored every day. And to raise kids here is just really something else. And it's the antithesis of my growing up where I did and how I did. And so, gosh, yeah, Crested Butte is home. And I just love it so much every day.
Awesome. Where, and again, I'll put this in the show notes, but what's the URL for your start?
www.Townie Books, TOWNIE Books, CB.com.
Townie Books CB. Awesome. Anything else I should have asked that you just want to talk about?
Oh gosh, man, there's so many things. I will tell you the quick story about becoming King of Seoul. I'm very proud of that. Back in 2007, I competed for King of Seoul. Back then, KBUT only did it they staggered it 1 year a king, 1 year a queen.
And what is this event? Because some people might not know.
If you're listening, you don't know, KBUT has a disco dance party every year. It's huge. People come from all over to attend this disco dance party, and they have a dance competition. They crown a king and queen of Seoul. And they've done this now, I think, for over 30 years, ever since, maybe even since there was a KBUT. So it's been a long time going. At one point, it was the Motown King and Queen, I believe, but then it became the King and Queen of Seoul. And DJ Triple L plays music, and you dance your butt off, and it's just a great night, and it's super fun. And that night was sort of the start of me dating my wife, my now wife, Danica, because I was just having such a blast, and I was wearing high heels, and I broke the heels dancing on the stage. I ripped off my shirt. I'll never look again. I have a dad bod now. I'll never take off my shirt in public, pretty much. I poured a cup of water on myself. I had long hair down all the way down my back. So it was pretty much the culmination of a pretty wild minute in my Crested Butte life. I'd never, even growing up in Miami, I never drank until I moved to Crested Butte. There's a lot of nevers in that story. And so that was just like kind of the beginning of being King of Seoul for those next 2 years. If you go on YouTube and you look up Crested Butte 4th of July, there's a great little blip of me in the 4th of July parade dancing to Michael Jackson.
Because that's part of being the king. You got to do that too, right?
You got to be in the parade. You got to do the parade. You got to do the stuff. You got to wear the crown. And it's been a great legacy ever since then. I think before I did the parade, no one had done it in many years. There's sort of been a little bit of bad luck around the 4th of July parade for the King of Seoul. And then when I did it, I was the first one to do it in a very long time. And it's gone on since then. It's been really great to watch, because I don't think many people even really, I think people mostly think of me now as a straight-laced bookstore guy and maybe not the King of Seoul. But I also, I just one more thing I'd like to mention is when I'm not in the bookstore, when I'm not working, when I'm not writing or taking care of my kids, I also serve on the board of High Country Conservation Advocates. And that's the organization that protects the air, land, and water here in Gunnison County. And it's a really incredible thing I get to be a part of. And if anyone has a moment to go check out hcca.org, it's just a really cool thing that I feel very attached to here. And like many people in Crested Butte, I mean, there's so many facets to everyone. It's no one in this town is two-dimensional, and that's one of the greatest things about living here.
So speaking of Hicka, have you been the Red Lady?
No, but my wife has.
Because and a few guys have, so maybe you can add that to your, king status in addition.
I'm not
And for those who
looking
don't know,
around.
the Red Lady, just real quick, there's a Red Lady ball that Hick always has. It's a fundraiser, and they always do a Red Lady is crowned there as well. So it's another.
We love the royalty in this town. That's
We
one of my
do.
favorite things. Having been a part of the royalty, and and being like on posters and stuff like that, which is really crazy to think about sometimes. Yeah, the sort of, I call it royalty season in my household, and hopefully one day maybe my kids will get to take part in all that stuff.
Well, so one last, there you go, for the royalty. I think that's another bucket list. You got to do Red Lady, and you also got to be Flauschink King someday. But
There
I
you
think you
go.
got to be here like another 20, 30 years to get Flauschink.
Probably I'll be if I make it that long, we'll see.
All right. Well, last question. Who else should I interview?
I think you should interview my wife. She's so amazing, and she's born and raised here. She inspires me all the time to really dig deeper into community. And I'll tell you one final quick story is I know I was a part of this town when we went up to the cemetery, and she showed me the few plots that her family had, and she said, "This one's for you."
Did she say that with a grimacing look that you weren't quite sure about?
She was dead serious.
Awesome.
There was no humor around that. It was part and parcel. We have a business together. We have a mortgage together. Here's your funeral plot.
That's awesome. Well, at least you got your future laid out for you.
I certainly do.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for listening to the Crested Butte is Home podcast. I appreciate all your support and appreciate that you think this content is good enough to take some time out of your day and listen to. I really appreciate that a lot. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast player, or you can visit crestedbutteshome.com and check out all the episodes there. And please sign up for my real estate newsletters, like I mentioned earlier, crestedbutterealestateagent.com/newsletters. That would be great. You can also follow me on social media. Just look up Crested Butte is Home. I'm Frank Consella, and I will see you again with another episode real soon. And everybody stay safe and healthy out there.